All right, Morgan Craven. Who's she going to be followed by? How do you say that? And you'll be followed by Christine Brogel.
Hi, my name is Morgan Craven. I'm the National Director of Policy for the Intercultural Development Research Association, IDRA, and I'm testifying on the bill. So we're really pleased to see several things in the bill. Like many others, we're pleased to see more money for educating students, including funding for full-day pre-K for 4-year-olds. But we are concerned about several aspects of the bill and their impact on equity in the system. And you can see this in the handout that was just given to you. So first, we're concerned that allowing an increase in unequalized funds collected by property-wealthy school districts while also reducing the golden penny yield adds inequity to the school finance system, and we just heard a discussion about that. Next, we're concerned that the new dual language weight does not benefit English learner students who are not enrolled in dual language programs. And I've testified about this before. We're really concerned that students who are in dual language programs get this additional weight, but the 51% of students who are not in dual language programs get the same 0.1 weight that they've always had. One thing that is new in the bill that we weren't expecting based on the School Finance Commission report, is an additional 0.05 weight for students who are already proficient in English who are in dual language programs. And our concern is, if there's money to give to the students who are already proficient in English who are in these programs, why can't we find the same money to give to the students who are English learners who need the money, and it's their civil right to have that money, who happen to not be in dual language programs? Next, we're concerned about removing spending rules for the compensatory and bilingual education allotments. We need those rules to make sure that the funds are spent in the right way on the students who need them and who are driving the collection for the district. And I do understand that there's a desire to expand options for districts and how they spend money, but what you're actually doing when you eliminate the rules about how the funds can be spent is you're reducing the overall funds that could be spent on English learners in particular. Next, we're concerned that changes to the way the compensatory education allotment is calculated could result in inaccurate counts of low-income students. So to be really clear, we support finding a way to consider concentrated poverty and generational poverty. We think that's really, really important, but we want to make sure that the data that is collected, the data that are collected are accurate, that they're up to date, and that they count many of the populations that are traditionally undercounted in the federal census. So we've spoken with others that are working on this, and we hope to continue to work with them to provide language. And then finally, because I know my time is up, we think that the bill gives too much power to the state's Commissioner of Education of TEA and not enough voice to the people that are impacted by the changes in the bill. Thank you.
All right. Representative Gonzalez.
Thank you, Morgan, for your testimony. We've talked a lot about a lot of topics, but the one thing we haven't talked a lot about is the English language learner and dual language. I do want to touch on that a little bit. I didn't realize so I guess I didn't realize that 51% of our ELLs are in bilingual education programs. Have you talked to schools about what are the differences between a bilingual language and a dual language, A? And will it be really difficult for schools to get to dual language? I'm worried about schools that are already resource scarce, ramping up so quickly, and then maybe losing some of that money for the English language learners. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I know that dual language is the star. If we don't even have enough English bilingual teachers now, which we know we don't, how are we? I'm just worried. Does that make sense?
Yes. So the 50% number is the number that was identified in the Commission report as the number of students who are in dual language programs. It's a little less than 50%. So dual language programs are one type of bilingual education program. So when you have the requisite number of kids who speak, who are English learners in the district and have to create a bilingual education program, you can choose from several types. And some districts adopt dual language programs, and some districts adopt other types of bilingual education programs, and then some students have English as a second language instruction. So those are the three basic types. So the dual language programs are in about 50% of schools, if that is accurate from the Commission report. And those are very good types of programs. Dual language programs are can be very, very effective, but they're also pretty resource intensive. And so it can be difficult for schools and school districts that don't already have those programs to adopt them. And it's not even clear that the weights that have been added in the bill will sufficiently cover enough of the cost of a program for it to actually be adopted. So our concern is, we see what the intent is to move toward dual language. And again, that's a very effective program for English learners. But the fact that you have over 50% of the English learners not in those programs right now and not able to access that money is very, very concerning.
And I just thought about this. Schools that might have multilingual, how does a dual language and a multilingual community look like?
So multilingual in the sense that there are students that speak more than one.
You have you have a diverse student body with multiple languages, and thus, again, an added resource to maybe do the dual language for multiple languages. Does that make sense?
Right. So I guess it depends on how the school district decides to address that, whether they adopt dual language for one particular language. Maybe it's Spanish and English dual language program, the one-way or the two-way, and then what they decide to do with the kids who speak other languages is kind of up to the district, whether they decide to adopt dual language programs for those students. Also, if there are even enough students, in a particular school to be able to do that.
Okay. Well,
does that answer your question?
It does. And the last thing I want to ask about is, we talked a little bit about this on the inaccurate counts of low-income students.
Right.
So, earlier, we're talking about the census and things like that. So I agree. We want to account for. But how would you have a more accurate count?
So I am not a census expert, but we have a census expert who is talking to the people in San Antonio ISD in particular who have worked on this issue. And so I know that they're discussing what that would look like. But from my understanding, part of the issue is figuring out how to make sure the data are up to date. So the comprehensive census is only taken every 10 years. So we're at this point 9 years out from the last time a comprehensive census was taken. And so I know that there are other measures that are collected, I think, at 1, 3, and 5 year intervals. Yeah. So just making sure that there are sort of clear ways to calculate and get accurate counts, particularly when we're getting down to individual student data using those data, the data sources that are in tighter intervals or smaller intervals in the 10 years. So it's not clear to me that we can get as specific as the bill intends to get with those 1, 3, and 5 year studies, but I think that's for the census experts to sort of develop and tell us what to do. That's my understanding of the issue right now.
Thank you, Morgan.
So a couple questions just to clarify, because I think that there's important points here. The dual language weight is for both one-way and two-way dual language, right? And so it is very resource intensive to do two-way dual language, but one-way dual language is easier to pull off. Isn't that right?
I would imagine that is correct.
Because it doesn't necessarily require sort of equal number or even a ratio of monolingual English speakers and otherwise. And so it's easier to do, my understanding is it's easier to do both that with a more homogeneous classroom or a more sort of multicultural international classroom. But I don't want to be wrong about that, so I'd like for us to look at it.
Yes.
The second thing is, I think it's important to point out that there's also a 0.1 weight for ELL students. For every ELL student K to 3rd grade, right? They get a 0.1 weight for, so they could go to pre-K or any other early childhood education piece, including services for dual language kids. I'm not saying it's enough. I'm not saying we should not look at it more. I just want to flesh out what the picture is. And I think that recommendations on how to get to other students is important, but I don't want to leave that part out, right? K to 3, 0.1 weight for pre-K or anything else, that even services that would serve just ELLs with that 0.1 weight for them. The second thing is, so in talking with the folks from SCISD, they say there's no, well, we're not even there yet, but they say there's no richer data source than the census. I think we can overlay it with risk factors or PEMS data, but I don't know that there's another data source that's better than that. And even though we do have concerns about the census, it's not about counts in terms of population counts. We're trying to identify the census blocks where groups of students who go to certain schools within the school's attendance zone live, so we can get an idea of the kind of generational poverty they're living in. It doesn't serve the same purpose as doing a count, right? So I think that we don't want to confuse the real issues with the census, especially the coming one, with whether or not we get an actual count of people, as opposed to understanding where students who go to a particular school live, so we understand the kind of poverty that they're living in to inform the spectrum weight. I'm just saying that if people have a better idea or a different idea on how to get richer data than the census, we should bring those forward. But the folks who have done this and modeled it say that there's not a richer data source than the census and the American Community Survey, which is the intervals.
Right.
I guess in general, I'm saying if you have ideas on how to address or fix or adjust any of these things, bring them, because now's the time to do it. I think we're
yes, and I appreciate that,
we're
and we're working on that now. And I would say that even if you're not going down to the individual level and just getting a sense for what neighborhoods are, I mean, there's still concerns with it being a comprehensive collection every 10 years, right? I mean, neighborhoods can rapidly change, and we know that can happen. And so I think that there are still concerns about the accuracy of the data. One more thing I'll flag for that particular section is that, and this is also from talking to folks in San Antonio, there's a concern that certain student populations, like homeless students, for example, who are not tied to any particular neighborhood, will have some sort of some difficulty in terms of being counted. That's something that they agreed on. So I would like to see
some of us are working on a wait for homeless kids.
Fantastic. Yeah. That was going to be my recommendation. Yeah. And I would just say to your point about the K through 3 additional 0.1 weight, that's absolutely true. And as I understand it, that's about 50% of the students. So you still have a bunch of students that are left that have the same 0.1 weight. And so making these additions for dual language students or for K through 3 doesn't cover everybody at all. And they need additional funds, and we've known that for some time.
I think we need to be sure, though, what that population that arguably is left out is. And then a recommendation on what else could be done. Representative Tellerico, did you want to?
I had a question for you, Mr. Vice Chair, if that's okay. Yeah, 2 questions actually. For ELLs, is the 0.1 and then the 0.15 for dual language cumulative? Do they stack?
Yes.
On top of each other? Okay.
Yes, they stack.
Second, on the comp ed issue, is your point about census being that in some ways, because we're talking about depth of poverty, that we're looking more for relative measures instead of absolute measures?
In other words, the granular scope is to figure out the kind of neighborhood that the student lives in, and the attendance zone that then informs the kind of poverty that surrounds a certain school, so that you can distribute
comparisons.
So you can distribute the spectrum weight properly. Right. That's the purpose. It's not so you know exactly what each student, like what their life circumstances is, to get a general idea of the kinds of students who go to a certain school and the kind of neighborhood that school is in and serves, to make sure you distribute it properly.
So possibly an imperfect measure like the census could still accomplish that goal.
I don't know that there's a perfect measure, but relative to free and reduced lunch, a much more perfect measure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Along those lines, I'm a bit concerned that the data that we're considering using is not available in rural areas and for rural schools. Any thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. So I mean, I'm not here to sell it to you. My understanding is the folks who are working on it are accounting for that. That there's a way to do it. I couldn't tell you what it is. I don't know if it's what I was talking to Representative Gonzalez about. If it's a combination of census data, risk factors, and PEMS data, but there is a way to do it that they feel confident about. When we get there, if we get there, my goal is to make sure that people are comfortable and satisfied with it. But absolutely, there's a recognition that the richness of data is more available for some urban areas versus some rural, but not all rural areas. I don't think you should assume that if you're in a rural area that you don't have it. I think that's an assumption. But there is an attempt to get it just right, or as right as we can be. And so we'll get that to you as soon as it's ready.
Good. Thank you.
All right. Yes, sir. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you,
Morgan, very much. And then I really do mean it. I'm looking forward to your recommendations so we can get at it.
We'll get them to you.
Thank you. All right. Where am I? All right, Christine Brogel. All right, and you'll be